I think I might have run out of fuel. Hi everybody, thanks for all the feedback you've given us on the E36 turbo project we've had on Facebook and YouTube over the last few weeks. Something everybody had asked us for was a bit of a walk around and what we'd actually done with the car and how we'd done what we'd done and what parts we had used. So we're going to do that today. Forgive us, we are pretty new to this YouTube thing. We're doing our best and we'll get better as we go. But yeah, let's get into it. This is Podrick. We name all our cars here at DERVTech. So this is Podrick, our little E36 328i. Bought him just before Christmas as a pretty much stock 328i M Sport. He's got 130,000 miles on the clock, and we really have done absolutely nothing other than bolt a few bits onto it and, you know, fabricate some stuff to make him go better. So we started off with a manifold and a downpipe from K64 Performance. Camille makes a great kit and we've used the bits quite a few times in the past. Good thing about this is he's actually mocked them up on a right-hand drive car, so it misses stuff like the steering rack and engine mounts and other kind of important things. Slight downside is it sits the turbo quite a lot further forward, which means you need a really small air filter ultimately. I've gone with the old T-strainer approach for now. We will get another headlight and sort of cut some of the back out of it and try and make a bit more room to fit that. So we're using stainless, again not quite ideal for boost pipes at the moment, but really it's sort of what we had kicking around. I know that the guys want to change these over to aluminium at some point. They're a bit heavy duty for what we need, but you know, they do a job perfectly. So the cold-sided turbo runs out down this side, sort of tucks through where the brake ducting used to go in the front there, and then hides in the into the intercooler there, which is behind the bumper. We've tried to hide it as much as possible, maybe paint that black eventually, you know, really sort of hide that. So then the cold side comes up here, runs into the inlet through a stock throttle body. This is a bit of a temporary measure, I must admit. The blow-off valve, again, none of us are actually that happy with kind of how it is, but we'd run out of space and needed a bit of, you know, just a bit of pipe really just to mock it up for now. It works, it does a job, it doesn't seem to cause us any problems where it is. I think ultimately we might either tuck it down underneath here or actually possibly even put it down either on the hot side down here or possibly out the side of the intercooler down on this side. A few other things we've had to modify over here, not too much actually, a little bit of the front of the wheel well there's had to just be massaged back a little bit, and we've mounted the fan controller down underneath here because we've removed the viscous, so we've had to take the viscous fan out the back. Really just not enough room with boost pipes and things down there, so we've used a Davies Craig fan controller with an electric fan sort of tucked between the intercooler and the water radiator at the front there. And then, yeah, piped in through standard MAF sensor, standard throttle body into a standard inlet manifold. We've done nothing special at all with those. The MAF sensor itself, again, you know, like a lot of things on this, kind of a bit of a work in progress. I have modified the wiring loom so that it uses a 1.2 kilo ohm resistor on the 5 volt signal back to the standard ECU, so it'll read a lot higher ultimately. You know, the standard MAF sensor is designed for 190 some horsepower and we're running, well, getting on 300 now, so that was always going to be out of resolution scope. We probably will eventually have to swap that over to a bigger MAF when we turn the boost up further, but for now that works perfectly. It's doing exactly what we need. We've kind of tidied a lot of the standard wiring up out here that we didn't need with removing the washer fluid bottle over here. we've sort of trimmed all the wiring back and put just a little kit car style washer bottle over here, wired into the standard loom, so it all works as standard. It's wired in and piped in, should I say, to the standard washer jets and everything. So it all works as per factory, but we've just had to sort of modify that to suit, really. So one of the things that is quite obvious, the change from a stock M52 328, we've put the 2.5 and M50 rocker cover on it. We've done that for the obvious reason that the downpipe and the actual turbine housing itself are very, very close to the rocker cover, and while we didn't have a problem with it, we did run it for a bit with a plastic M52 cover on it. All of us were kind of thinking, yeah, this is pretty close and it might get quite hot. We've also a bit of a temporary measure again until we've got time to make up a like a thermal plate or something. We've used some of this high temperature silicon glass fibre type heat shielding stuff. Really, we just put it against a plate on there just to hide the coil packs away from the temperature a bit. The heat wrap itself actually does pretty well. It really does keep the heat inside exactly as it's meant to. So it wasn't ever a problem before, but it was one of those things that as we started to lean on the car and started to push it harder and harder, we knew that the temperature might become a bit of a problem. Same way we've done away with the stuff under the bonnet, so we've removed all the sound deadening and everything, not because we want to hear the whooshy noises so much, although that is quite useful. But again, that is 30 years old, getting on 25 years old, whatever it is, and oil and time and everything have got to it. Putting it right near something that's quite so hot as a downpipe, maybe not the best of ideas. But ultimately we've tried to keep it as stock as it can be, with a great big GT35 sat on the front there. Quite a nice little install, we're quite pleased with it so far. It's been really reliable, and yeah, there's a few things we need to change, bits of wiring and bits of this and that, but we are pretty pleased with how it's come out. So this is a Siemens MS41 ECU, factory ECU in one of these cars. Most BMWs of the day came with Siemens ECUs, they then moved to Bosch, they then moved back to Siemens, they moved back to Bosch again. But in this era they were mostly all on these actually towards the end of an E36 life. We use these for all sorts, so these can be modified to work with a turbo conversion, they can be modified to work with superchargers, they can be modified to work with throttle bodies, and they don't really need much in the way of adjustment to actually give you loads and loads of power. So all we've really had to do to the car to make one of these work in a turbo application is, like I mentioned before, adjust the MAF sensor so that it has more scaling. It's obviously reading a lot more airflow with a turbo, so there's a resistor in line that does that for us. We've also fitted some Siemens DEKA 630cc injectors, and I've removed the factory lambda sensors in this case and gone with a wideband sensor, which is over here in the downpipe. Which runs, again, admittedly through a little bit of a loom because I haven't sort of tidied it up yet, but through a wideband controller. This is an Innovate system that I'm using here, and then this gives us both a gauge in the car, which is useful for when I'm tuning, but also a simulated narrowband output back to the ECU again. So we've got Winols, we've got OLS 300 for emulation, so I've got another one of these ECUs with the top sort of cut out of it and the chip removed. We've shown it on previous videos before, and I'll show it with this car in a minute. What that allows us to do is basically tune this as if it was an aftermarket ECU, so we can do live real tuning on the dyno with it. It's really, really powerful, and all of these cars that we kick out with cams in them and throttle bodies and all sorts, we use all the same equipment. We always like to stick to these factory ECUs because you get fault codes and you get all the sort of standard, you plug your OBD connector in under the bonnet, or you plug your OBD connector in the car if you've got one, and all that same sort of stuff works and behaves and does what it needs to do. You can modify loads of the signals out here so that things like boost control happen. I haven't done it yet, but we're able to run boost control from this factory ECU, so we can spool the turbo up and down depending on where in the revs we are and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a really, really powerful system, and we've had some really great results using this platform, and we stick with it where possible. So there aren't many chassis mods on this car. We haven't really needed to be honest. It's been pretty good out the box. We fitted a Bilstein B12 kit, so it's got the Bilstein dampers and the I-back springs. Still on stock brakes at the minute, which is a bit frightening with the kind of power it's got. We've also fitted a limit slip diff, so we've gone with a JC Racing 4-plate limit slip diff. with a sort of a billet end plate, a steel billet end plate on it. I think it's steel actually, not billet, for strength, so that we can throw quite a lot of torque at this when we get decompression in it and we can turn the boost up. We've changed a bunch of the kind of standard bushes that you would change, like these, you know, the ones in on the lower arms down here, and some bits in the front and stuff, but fundamentally it's pretty much a stock car, just with kind of new components freshened up a little bit. So as we mentioned when we were up on the top side underneath the bonnet, we used a K64 Performance manifold. So we've used manifold and downpipe from them. We've pretty much made all the rest of it ourselves. We've been a little bit cheeky and dropped the screamer pipe out the wastegate straight out the front. It is pretty loud when you get it on boost, so what we might ultimately do in the end is route it back in and sort of in the downpipe so it runs through the silencers and stuff. It's 130,000 miles worth of oil leaks and grottiness under here, so it is not, you know, by any stretch of the imagination a swanky full build or anything. It's just had the bits done that it's needed doing. Same thing with things like, you know, exhaust system. We've not spent a load of money on an exhaust. We've made something in the house. The guys have made me, you know, a big turbo back stainless exhaust. We've not sort of put too many bends in it or anything, because what we're ultimately going to do is probably put a resonator somewhere here in the middle, probably either back here or here somewhere. It is a bit loud when you get it on boost out on the road, so yeah, resonator in there somewhere. At the moment just runs through a back box and then out of a single tailpipe. I think ultimately again we might put sort of 2 tailpipes on the back so that it looks even more like a standard factory car. We've tried to, where possible, keep it looking like a standard thing, so you know, it's got the sleeper element to it if you like. But yeah, pretty happy with it. It is a bit oily and a bit grotty under here, but everything's kind of as it needs to be. Like I was saying earlier, I've got a slave ECU that I use for this, so the top's kind of cut off the top, chips removed, and then I've got the OLS 300 emulator wired into that, which plugs into my laptop and allows me to live tune the ECU. This is just one I've got around the workshop that I use on pretty much all cars that come through the door. And I can load any map into this, whether it's a turbo base file or a supercharged one, or if I want to put in you know, a cam throttle bodied one, I can drop one of those in there straight from the laptop, do all my tuning on the laptop live, which I'll show you in a sec when I get into the car, and then ultimately once I'm happy with that I can flash the fully tuned file back onto the customer's ECU, and yeah, all good. So I'm back in the E36 Turbo. We've just done some video in the workshop of, you know, how we put the build together and the things that we did. I'm going to do some dyno pulls and sort of show you in real time what this stuff looks like. I've got trusty hand cam here. I can sort of show you what's going on the laptop in terms of, you know, the data from the emulator directly off the OLS 300 that you've seen under the bonnet. I've got my wideband sensor in here as well, so I can see exactly what is going on with the fueling, and probably most importantly I've also got my heated seat on because it's about 3 degrees outside and it is absolutely freezing. I've got a few different cameras running, I've got data logging stuff going. I'm also using, we have talked about this before, but Sorex logger.s. So I've got this hooked up with an OBD cable directly back into the car, so you can see just a normal OBD cable here. That system is basically doing all my data logging for me today. So I'm running that software here, running this little hardware unit that Sorek provides, the logger.s. I'll put a link in the description, or I'll put it in one of those little cards up there at the top if you want to have a link through to that. So the really useful bit of kit, it's got an SD card in it, you can see sort of from the camera there. When I hit full throttle, it will automatically start recording for me. It'll log knock, it'll log airflow, it'll log load, it does all sorts of stuff. It's a really, really trick little device, really useful. So this file that I've loaded into the emulator, the map that's in the car, is actually not the last version that I left it on, so it's a good opportunity for me to show you that it is actually a bit rich in this case, and sort of what I'm looking for. So I've just hit the start a dyno run button on the hand controller that I've got here with me. Fans are all running and everything. The dyno is now prepped and waiting for me to sort of get on and do it, so it's sitting, I'm just idling over in 5th gear at the minute. The dyno's set to run from 1300 RPM, so when I bring the car up to 1300 RPM, the dyno will kind of hold me there until it's ready to release, till it stabilizes and ready to release. It'll do all the logging and all the rest, but we're going to look here live. I'm just going to hit the throttle now in real time at what the fueling is. So I'm fairly happy with that kind of fueling down the bottom there. But I was seeing it dip, well it still is actually dipping down into the 10s. So we can see that the fueling is a bit rich down the bottom there. So what we can do, you can actually see here, maybe not so well on the camera, see here, this is the main enrichment table at full throttle effectively. So I can see down through the middle there where it's a bit rich. It's getting sort of 30-something% added fuel-wise to it, so it's probably a bit too much in this case. Now I know from looking at the previous, or the correct version of the map for the car, should I say, I have pulled some fuel out there. So if I want to get in and actually change that, the right way to do it is to steady state tune it. Well, what does steady state actually mean? Well, if I bring the dyno up onto my sort of data screen, what I can do is set the dyno so that it will lock the car out at a certain amount of RPM. So I'll try and show that on the handheld camera here while I'm doing it. But I can see from that what the fueling is at a certain place in the revs. And just like you can with an aftermarket ECU, I can then pull fuel out, add fuel, add ignition, etc. at a certain point in the revs. So yeah, so I'm sort of 1400 RPM there. No, actually the fueling's all right. You can see the car's locked out at a certain RPM and the dyno just won't let it go anymore. That's my foot to the floor. So if I knock that up a couple of hundred RPM, maybe 1500 RPM this time, we'll see what the fuel's like at 1500. Again, still all right. So let's knock it up to 1800 RPM. Yep, still all right there. Go up to maybe 2000 RPM, just above. So yeah, it feels all right, so at that level as well. Go up another one, 2200 RPM. Still right there. So go up another one and basically keep doing this until we find the spot that's too rich. The other way, of course, that we could do this is we can look at the data logs. So we can look back and see, so I'm running logger S here, I can see from logger S that at 3200 revs is where the AFR dips down to like 10.9 or something, and all that data's been displayed to me here live on the device. So I can now make that change here, so I can find the correct area of the ECU, so 3,500 revs, and I can now start to pull some fueling out of there. Once I'm happy that I've pulled an amount of fueling out of that, I can run the car again, see what it's like full throttle, transient through the revs, and I can basically fine-tune that as we go. So another fairly useful tool that I use quite a lot actually with these is I use the logger.s to data log the actual data off the car itself, and then I load that into an online system for data logging, something like I like DataZap. I think it's a really good system. Load the data log into that, and you can pick the channels you want to display and sort of just see those on the screen and scroll through them. So I can see airflow, and I can see load in this case, and RPM, and I can look through that data and make any changes that maybe you struggle to kind of keep up with when you're trying to keep your eye on the AFI, you're trying to keep your eye on the dyno, you're trying to keep your eye on the emulator, and being able to see all of those sort of things back after the run is completed are really, really useful, especially when you're trying to make changes to a car that's making quite a bit more power than standard like this, where you are trying to keep your eyes on other things like temperatures and stuff as well. So that's it, we're done. Nothing's melted, everything's still where it should be, so that's always good. Seriously though, I think 300 horsepower, 400 newton meters is about the sensible maximum limit for a stock car like this. Now clearly we will be putting some head studs in this, and we will be putting a decompression plate in it, and we will be putting a proper clutch in it. So we hope to see more like 400 horsepower, maybe 450 newton meters, something like that, which will make for a really quick car on the road. If this sort of video with an overview of things we've done and technical stuff, you know, here on the dyno is something that you're interested in, comment, subscribe, share, let us know. We are pretty new to this YouTube thing, but we will try and bring you the sort of content that you want to see. We've got a number of other E36s in our fleet. We've got a 3.3 Alpina with cams in it. We've got a 2.8 with some cams in it. We've got an E46 with an M140i B58 engine in it, if that's something that you're interested in seeing. So let us know. Yeah, and thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.